Through the use of tariffs, foreign aid, renegotiated trade deals, the Trump administration is forcing a change in politics all around the world. The latest has been the trade war that's taken center stage between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. But alongside this, there are new U.S. trade politics that require global changes on identity politics. There's a new push for other countries to drop forms of online censorship. And when taken all together, the policies represent a new form of American diplomacy using financial power as its tool. Now on this, a key part is the campaign. It's impacting groups that until very recently represented a type of globalist government. Now part of this is the World Health Organization, the WHO, under the United Nations. And over the last few years, it was looking like the WHO would get a global pandemic treaty. Do you remember that? That would grant it significant influence globally to manage health crisis, including pressuring other countries, including the United States. But now the organization is, let's say, struggling to get by. This is the United Nations itself. It says recent funding cuts have caused severe disruptions to health services in almost 3/4 of all countries. Which country then was basically propping up the health policies of 3/4 of all countries? Well, here's what it says. Speaking on Thursday at a press conference in Geneva, Tedros said that in around 25% of countries, some health facilities have had to close completely due to cuts, according to figures from more than 100 countries compiled by WHO. It says this: out-of-pocket payments for health services had led to disruptions to the supply of medicines and other health products, as well as rising job losses in the healthcare sector. As a result, quote, countries are revising budgets, cutting costs, and strengthening fundraising and partnerships, said the UN Health Agency chief. So where did all that money come from? What's making it so all these countries don't have those health policies, right? Well, a lot of that was because Donald Trump and his administration began cutting U.S. funding to it. Now, this happened during Trump's flurry of executive orders on his first day of office. And watch this, folks.
Withdrawing from the World Health Organization, sir?
Ooh, that's a big one. So we paid $500 million to World Health when I was here, and I terminated it. China, with 1.4 billion people, we have 350. China pays 39 million, and we pay 500 million. And China's a bigger country.
And now, well, the aftermath of the U.S. withdrawal is becoming clearer. The WHO is cutting jobs and slashing their budgets now. Reuters said this. The World Health Organization, WHO, is proposing to reduce staff numbers and the scale of its work as it slashes its budget by just over 1/5 due to the impact of U.S. funding cuts, according to an internal memo seen by Reuters. It says the U.S. is by far the UN Health Agency's biggest financial backer, contributing around 18% of its overall funding. And they say, quote, the United States' announcement, combined with recent reductions in official development assistance by some countries to fund increased defense spending, has made our situation much more acute, stated the WHO memo, which was dated March 28th and signed by WHO's Director General Tedros. And it says the U.S. withdrawal has exacerbated a funding crisis due to member states reducing their development spending, faced with an income gap of nearly $600 million this year. The WHO has proposed to slash its budget for 2026 to 2027 by 21%, which is about what the U.S. cut, by the way, from U.S. $5.3 billion to U.S. $4.2 billion, according to the memo. So it's important to note, it's not only just the U.S. spending less, it's also that the U.S. is making like Europe pay their fair share in defense, trying to, and that's cutting their ability to give it more money as well. Now, Trump did suggest if we can work out a better deal, there is a chance he might renegotiate with the World Health Organization. But remember, when he pulled the United States out of the WHO during his first term in office, it was because the United Nations agency was not able to demonstrate its independence from communist China. And also, look, even with the funding cuts, the World Health Organization is not dropping its other initiatives. For example, its push for the pandemic treaty is still underway. They're still pushing for it. Politico just said this, by the way. It says World Health Organization members will reconvene on Tuesday, just recently, to finalize a deal on sharing life-saving technology with developing countries as part of a new pandemic agreement, after all-night talks brought them within striking distance of an accord. It says the WHO members have reached an agreement in principle over how to tackle future pandemics. After 3 years of discussions, the co-chair of the negotiating body told the agency France Presse on Saturday. And according to the latest draft of the proposed pact obtained by Politico, most of the text is now agreed, meaning they're going to do it. It says still to be signed off on is contentious language covering the sharing of technology for pandemic-related products such as drugs, vaccines, and therapeutics. Developing countries have pushed for a strong language that will ensure they are able to scale up production in their own regions rather than waiting in line for critical technologies. Now look, in terms of the broader picture of what Trump's spending cuts and withdrawals and elimination programs, what this actually does, the U.S. withdrawal from the WHO is just one piece of this. There's a lot of other stuff. The actions to significantly cut programs under USAID, those got a lot of attention. A lot of people paid attention to that. But there were similar ones to that, similar organizations and spending that were also cut and that were being used for similar ways, right? For example, there was USIP, that's the U.S. Institute of Peace. Have you heard of that? Well, that organization has now been severely impacted. Washington Examiner said this: the Trump administration fired nearly the entire staff of the U.S. Institute of Peace headquarters in Washington, D.C. on Friday, according to multiple reports. It says the mass firings in what anonymous employees characterized as a Friday night massacre to the Washington Post affected somewhere between 200 and 300 employees at the nonprofit organization, all of whom were offered severance packages and 1 month of health insurance if they waived their right to sue the institute. Now, look, what is this? Well, the USIP was created by Congress. It's a U.S.-funded think tank. It also allegedly works to prevent and resolve global conflicts. It's framed by a lot of critics as basically a color revolution organization. The Trump administration alleges that its goal to stop all these conflicts has not been met. And so the idea is, well, why are we keeping it? And it's now facing some reshuffling and investigations from the DOJ department because of that. And it's not even just there. There are a lot of other organizations, other programs, funding channels, other issues that all help to fund and support global initiatives which tend to be very politically divisive. They tended to help people on the left, maybe the far left. Among these, Planned Parenthood. There is a very large legal battle right now going on over the Planned Parenthood funding. And this is particularly around whether or not it can use Medicaid to help run its operations, taxpayer-funded money. And the implications from a looming Supreme Court ruling on this could likewise have some big ripple effects through the entire medical system. The Epoch Times said at the heart of the case is the question of whether federal law unambiguously bestows Medicaid patients with the right to choose a specific provider. Planned Parenthood and the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals says it does. But the state of South Carolina, which bars taxpayer funding of abortion, meaning the state can ban it, but people can use Medicaid to pay for it still, says the law empowers states to decide which providers are qualified for Medicaid funding, like if they ban a certain organization. And notes that South Carolina has asked the Supreme Court to step in, and depending on how it's decided, the case could deal a potentially fatal blow to Planned Parenthood or set back widespread efforts to defund the organization once and for all. It says the case was prompted by South Carolina Governor Henry McMaster's 2018 directive ordering the state's health department to terminate all abortion providers from the Medicaid program. The order deemed all abortion clinics to be unqualified to provide family planning services. Planned Parenthood South Atlantic and one of the affiliate's Medicaid patients swiftly filed a federal lawsuit challenging the order. It says at issue is a provision of the Social Security Amendments of 1965, also called the Medicare and Medicaid Act, The statute requires state Medicaid plans to, quote, provide that any individual eligible for medical assistance may obtain such assistance from any provider qualified to perform the service or services required. Meaning, well, they may ban abortion or restrict it in a certain state, but if Planned Parenthood does it, or for example, if they restrict taxpayer money from going to it, Planned Parenthood works as the workaround for it. It says who undertakes to provide him such services. Now look, that story is going to change a lot depending on who you're talking to, but basically it allows states to deny Medicaid funding for select organizations, Planned Parenthood in this case. And that would mean if people are on Medicaid, a state could restrict them from using abortion services. There's no way around it. For example, with Planned Parenthood as a state-funded service. And that would also cut very deeply into the organization's finances. The scissors are reaching up to it, right? Now, part of the argument for that is religious. A lot of Americans have a religious dispute with abortion. And it goes into whether they believe there's a human soul or not, right? And if this violates somebody's religion, they probably don't want their tax dollars being used for it either, because you're forced to pay taxes. Would you want your tax dollars being used for something that goes against your religious beliefs? But the other side is that Planned Parenthood isn't just an abortion service. It also does a lot with political financing. It's engaged very deeply in social activism. It's an education system that tends to be on the very far left hand of politics. So there's also a question about using taxpayer dollars for partisan and politically active organizations. Should we be funding an organization that basically exists on the far left of politics and tries to advance that? That's also the question. And that also ties into the broader picture of what we're watching now unfold. Many organizations that are now losing money, whether it's through USAID or having their budgets cut or people fired, many of them are politically active organizations, especially toward the far left of politics. And look, even those that were not, well, there were accusations they were in turn giving money to deeply partisan organizations and movements. There was like a kind of a tree structure, right? Different branches, and the branches were growing the fruits of like far left groups and so on. And even with some of the major agencies, the concerns over politically partisan funding, using your tax dollars for what are just politically activist organizations, is becoming the backdrop of a lot of the investigations and spending cuts we're now watching from the Trump administration.